Colonel Sarah Mitchell had seen more than her share of difficult days during her 34 years of military service. But nothing quite prepared her for the humiliation she felt standing outside Gate 7 of Fort Harrison Army Base in rural Virginia on a crisp October morning. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside," the young security guard said, barely looking up from his clipboard. His name tag read Jenkins, and he couldn't have been more than 25 years old. Sarah straightened her shoulders, her silver hair pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn for decades. "Corporal, I'm Colonel Sarah Mitchell. I have clearance for this facility. My credentials are right here." Jenkins glanced at her ID card with obvious disinterest. "The system shows your access was revoked, ma'am. I can't let you through." "That's impossible," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite the growing frustration. "I'm the lead engineer on the water treatment project. I have a meeting with the base commander in 20 minutes. "Not according to my screen." Jenkins turned his monitor slightly, showing her a red error message. "Says here your clearance expired last month. You'll need to go to the visitors center and sort it out." Sarah knew for a fact that her clearance was current. She'd renewed it just 6 weeks ago. But she also knew that arguing with a gate guard who was just following his orders wouldn't help. "Fine," she said quietly. "I'll go to the visitors center." As she turned to walk back to her car, she heard Jenkins mutter to another guard, "These old-timers always forget to keep their paperwork up to date." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept walking. She'd learned long ago that dignity meant not responding to every slight, every assumption that her age made her incompetent. The visitors center was a small building about a quarter-mile from the main gate. Inside, a bored-looking civilian clerk sat behind bulletproof glass, scrolling through his phone. "I need to verify my security clearance," Sarah said through the speaker. The clerk sighed as if she just asked him to climb Mount Everest. "Name?" "Colonel Sarah Mitchell." He typed slowly, hunting and pecking at the keyboard. "Says here you're not in the system." "That can't be right. I've had continuous clearance at this base for 5 years." "Well, the computer says you're not here, so," he shrugged. "You'll need to fill out new paperwork. Takes about 6 weeks to process." 6 weeks? Sarah felt her patience slipping. "I have a meeting in 15 minutes. There must be someone who can fix this." "Look, lady, I just work here. The system is the system." Sarah took a deep breath. She'd spent 3 decades breaking through barriers in a male-dominated military, working twice as hard to earn half the respect. She'd commanded troops in 2 war zones, designed water systems that saved thousands of lives, and received commendations from 3 different generals. She wasn't about to let a computer glitch stop her now. "I need to speak to your supervisor," she said firmly. The clerk rolled his eyes but picked up a phone. "Yeah, got another one here who wants to talk to management." 20 minutes later, Sarah was sitting across from a harried-looking woman named Patricia Delgado, the deputy security director for the base. "Colonel Mitchell, I apologize for the inconvenience," Patricia said, though her tone suggested this was just another annoying problem in a long day. "But our system is very clear. Your credentials aren't showing up." "Then your system is wrong," Sarah said. "I have my renewal paperwork right here." She pulled out a folder from her briefcase, showing the stamped and signed documents. Patricia barely glanced at them. "The paper doesn't matter if it's not in the computer. We upgraded our security system last month. Everything has to be digital now. So fix it in the computer." "I would if I could, but I don't have access to make those changes. You'll need to contact the regional security office." Sarah felt like she was going in circles. "And how long will that take?" "Hard to say. Could be a few days, could be a few weeks." "I have a critical meeting today about the water treatment facility. People are depending on me." Patricia's expression softened slightly, but she shook her head. "I'm sorry, Colonel, rules are rules. Without proper clearance in the system, I can't authorize your entry to the base. It's a security issue. Sarah left the visitors center feeling defeated for the first time in years. She sat in her car in the parking lot and called her assistant, Lieutenant Amy Chen. "Colonel, where are you?" Amy asked. "The meeting started 10 minutes ago." "I'm stuck outside the gate. There's some kind of problem with my clearance." "That's impossible. I verified everything last week." "I know, but they won't let me on base. Can you reschedule the meeting?" There was a pause. "The base commander can only meet today. He's deploying to Germany tomorrow for 6 months. If we don't get his approval on the water project today, everything gets delayed indefinitely." Sarah closed her eyes. The water treatment facility wasn't just another project. Fort Harrison's water system was contaminated with lead and other toxins. Soldiers and their families were being affected. Children were showing elevated lead levels in their blood tests. Sarah had designed a fix, but it required the commander's sign-off and funding authorization. "I'll figure something out," Sarah said. "Stall them as long as you can." She ended the call and sat in silence for a moment. Then she noticed something. An elderly man was walking along the fence line that bordered the parking lot. He looked to be in his late 60s, with weathered skin and work-worn hands. He wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt, and he was studying the fence with intense concentration. Sarah got out of her car, drawn by curiosity. As she got closer, she could see that the man was examining a large water pipe that ran along the outside of the fence. The pipe was connected to the base's water system, and it was leaking. Not dramatically, but steadily. A small puddle had formed on the ground. "Excuse me," Sarah said. "Are you with the base maintenance crew?" The man turned, and Sarah saw kind blue eyes set in a face lined by decades of sun and hard work. "No, ma'am, just a concerned citizen. Name's Frank Holloway." He extended his hand, and Sarah shook it, feeling the calluses that spoke of a lifetime of manual labor. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. You seem very interested in that pipe." Frank nodded. "I've been watching this leak get worse for 3 weeks now. Been trying to tell folks at the gate that it needs fixing, but they keep sending me away. Say I need security clearance to report maintenance issues." He shook his head. "Bureaucracy." Sarah looked at the pipe more closely. It was part of the main water line feeding into the base. "This connects to the treatment facility." "Yep, and if I'm not mistaken, that leak is causing a pressure drop in the whole system, probably playing havoc with the water treatment process." Sarah's mind started racing. She'd been dealing with inconsistent pressure readings for weeks. Her team couldn't figure out the source. They'd brought in experts, run diagnostics, spent thousands of dollars trying to solve the problem. And here it was, a simple leak in an external pipe. "How did you know about the pressure drop?" Sarah asked. Frank smiled. "I was a plumber for 47 years before I retired. Worked on military bases, schools, hospitals. You learn to read the signs. See how the water's coming out. That pattern tells you there's a crack about 3 inches long on the underside of the pipe. And see that discoloration on the concrete. That means it's been leaking for at least a month, maybe more." Sarah stared at this unassuming man, who just diagnosed in 2 minutes what her team of engineers had been struggling with for weeks. "Mr. Holloway, would you be willing to show me exactly where you think the problem is?" "Happy to, but we can't get to it from this side. Need to access it from inside the base." "That might be a problem," Sarah said. "I can't even get myself on base right now, much less a civilian without clearance." Frank chuckled. "Story of my day. Been trying to help for weeks, but nobody wants to listen to an old plumber." Sarah looked back toward the gate, then at the leaking pipe, then at Frank. An idea was forming. "Mr. Holloway, I'm the lead engineer on the water treatment project. I've had 6 different experts look at our pressure problem. They've all failed to find the source. If you're right about this leak, you might have just solved what nobody else could." "Well, I'd be happy to help fix it if they'd let me." "What if I could get us both on that base?" Frank raised an eyebrow. I thought you said you couldn't get in. I can't, not through official channels. But I've been on military bases my whole life. There are always unofficial channels. She pulled out her phone and made a call. Amy, it's me again. I need you to do something and I need you to trust me. Go to Gate 7 and tell Corporal Jenkins that you're meeting a contractor outside for a consultation. Get him to open the pedestrian gate. Once it's open, create a distraction. Drop something, ask a lot of questions, anything to keep his attention away from the gate for 60 seconds. Colonel, what are you planning? Something that's either going to save this project or end my career. Can you do it? There was only a brief hesitation. Yes, ma'am, give me 10 minutes. Sarah looked at Frank. Mr. Holloway, how do you feel about a little adventure? The old plumber grinned. Ma'am, at my age, I'll take all the adventure I can get. 10 minutes later, Sarah and Frank were positioned near Gate 7, hidden behind a delivery truck that was being inspected. Sarah watched as Lieutenant Amy Chen approached the gate from the inside, exactly as planned. Amy was young but sharp, and she played her part perfectly. She walked up to Corporal Jenkins with a clipboard and an urgent expression. Corporal, I need to step outside for just a moment, Amy said. I'm meeting a contractor who's supposed to deliver specifications for the water project. Jenkins looked skeptical. Ma'am, contractors need to check in through the visitor's center. I know, but this is time sensitive. The base commander is waiting. I just need to step out, get the paperwork, and come right back. It'll take 30 seconds. Sarah saw Jenkins hesitate. He was young and by the book, but he also didn't want to be the reason a meeting with the base commander got delayed. Make it quick, he finally said, buzzing open the pedestrian gate. Amy stepped through, and just as she did, she fumbled her clipboard. Papers went everywhere, scattering in the morning breeze. Oh no, Amy exclaimed, loud enough for everyone to hear. I'm so sorry. She dropped to her knees, gathering papers. Jenkins, being a decent kid despite his earlier dismissiveness, came around to help her. Both guards were now focused on collecting the scattered documents. Sarah didn't waste a second. She grabbed Frank's arm and they moved quickly but calmly through the open gate. They walked with purpose, like they belonged there, heading straight toward the water treatment facility building. That was smoother than I expected, Frank said quietly. The key is to look like you have every right to be there, Sarah replied. I learned that lesson a long time ago. They made it to the building without incident. Sarah used her key card on the door, half expecting it not to work, but the lock clicked open. Whatever problem existed in the security database apparently hadn't filtered down to individual building access yet. Inside, Sarah led Frank directly to the mechanical room where the main water line entered the facility. The room was filled with pipes, valves, gauges, and monitoring equipment. It looked like organized chaos to most people, but to Sarah, it was a familiar landscape. Frank immediately went to the pressure gauge. See this reading, it's fluctuating, should be steady. That's your first sign. He traced the main water line with his eyes, following it from where it entered the building. The leak is before this point, which means it's outside. The pipe runs along the fence line, right? Yes, exactly. And I'm betting there's an access panel somewhere along that run. Sarah thought for a moment. There is, about 50 yards down from where we saw the leak, but it's on the secure side of the fence. Let's take a look. They left the mechanical room and walked around the outside of the building. Sarah was acutely aware that she was technically trespassing on a military base now. If they were caught, her career would be over. But she also knew that if they didn't fix the water system soon, children would continue to be exposed to contaminated water. Some things were worth the risk. They found the access panel where Sarah remembered it. Frank knelt down and examined it with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent a lifetime looking at pipes. Got a wrench in that facility? He asked. I've got a full toolkit. 5 minutes later, Sarah returned with tools. Frank selected what he needed and began carefully opening the access panel. As he worked, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was Amy. "Colonel, the meeting is about to start. They're asking for you. Stall them for 15 more minutes. Tell them I'm dealing with an emergency on the water system. Tell them I've found the source of the pressure problem." "Have you?" "I think so, I hope so." Frank had the panel open now. He peered inside with a small flashlight, then nodded slowly. "There she is. Come look at this." Sarah leaned over. In the beam of the flashlight, she could see exactly what Frank had predicted: a 3-inch crack in the underside of the pipe, with water seeping out steadily. "How did you know?" Sarah asked, genuinely amazed. Frank sat back on his heels. "When you've been doing something for almost 50 years, you develop instincts. See, most folks these days, they rely on computers and sensors to tell them what's wrong. And those things are useful, don't get me wrong. But sometimes the old ways work better. Sometimes you just need to look, listen, and think." "Can you fix it?" "Not permanently, not without proper materials and time. But I can do a temporary patch that'll hold for a few weeks until a proper repair can be scheduled. That is, if you've got pipe sealant and clamps in that toolkit." Sarah did. She'd learned long ago to keep her workshop fully stocked. As Frank worked, Sarah found herself studying this unassuming man. He moved with quiet efficiency, no wasted motion, no hesitation. His hands were steady despite his age. He explained what he was doing as he worked. "The key is to clean the surface first, even though it's wet. You get as much water cleared as you can, then apply the sealant in layers. Give each layer a few seconds to start setting before the next one. Then you clamp it tight, but not too tight. Too much pressure can crack the pipe worse." "Where did you learn all this?" Sarah asked. Frank smiled, not looking up from his work. "My daddy was a plumber and his daddy before him. I grew up crawling under houses and into crawl spaces, learning the trade. Joined the Navy when I was 18, worked on ship systems for 6 years. After that, came back home and started my own business. Did everything from residential to commercial to military contracts." "You worked on military bases?" "Oh, sure. Spent 10 years doing contract work for the Army and Air Force. Installed systems, repaired them, upgraded them. That was back in the 70s and 80s. Things were different then. If you knew your job and could do it well, folks didn't care much about your paperwork or your credentials. They cared about results." Sarah felt a pang of recognition. "And now?" "Now everything's about credentials and clearances and computer systems. Don't get me wrong, security is important, but sometimes it gets in the way of common sense." He glanced up at her. "I'm guessing you know something about that." "More than I'd like to," Sarah admitted. Frank applied the final layer of sealant and secured the clamp. "There, that should hold. The pressure should stabilize in about 5 minutes." They waited, watching the gauge on the nearby pressure monitor. Slowly but surely, the needle stopped fluctuating and settled into a steady position. "You did it," Sarah said, unable to keep the relief out of her voice. "We did it," Frank corrected. "You knew there was a problem and you were willing to think outside the box to solve it. That takes courage." Sarah's phone rang. It was Amy again, and this time she sounded stressed. "Colonel, I can't stall anymore. The base commander says if you're not here in 5 minutes, he's canceling the meeting." "I'm on my way." Sarah looked at Frank. "I need to get to this meeting. Will you be okay getting off the base?" Frank chuckled. "Ma'am, I've been sneaking in and out of places for weeks trying to report that leak. I think I can manage. You go do what you need to do." Sarah hesitated. "Mr. Holloway, I want you to know that what you did today matters, really matters. When this is all sorted out, I'm going to make sure you get proper recognition." "I don't need recognition," Frank said. "I just wanted to help, but I appreciate the thought." Sarah shook his hand one more time, then hurried toward the administration building where the meeting was being held. She made it with 1 minute to spare. The conference room was filled with people. The base commander, Colonel James Peterson, the deputy commander, the facilities manager, representatives from the Army Corps of Engineers, and her own team, including Amy. "Colonel Mitchell," Peterson said coolly, "good of you to join us. I understand there was a security issue this morning." Sarah decided honesty was the best approach. "Yes, sir. There's an error in the security database. My clearance isn't showing up in the system, even though it's current." "That's being looked into," Peterson said, though his tone suggested it wasn't a priority. "Now, we have limited time. I need to understand why this water treatment project is taking so long and costing so much." For the next hour, Sarah presented her findings, her solutions, and her timeline. She explained the contamination levels, the health risks, and the engineering challenges. She showed data, projections, and cost analyses. But she could feel the skepticism in the room. Every time she made a point, someone questioned it. When she explained the pressure inconsistencies that had delayed the project, the Corps of Engineers representative shook his head. "Colonel Mitchell, my team examined that system 3 weeks ago. We found no evidence of pressure problems." "That's because the problem was external," Sarah said. "A leak in the main supply line outside the fence." "I find that hard to believe," the representative said. "My engineers are the best in their field." "I'm sure they are," Sarah said carefully, "but they didn't find this particular leak. Someone else did." "Who?" Peterson asked. Sarah took a breath. This was the moment of truth. A retired plumber named Frank Holloway. "He identified the problem and helped me patch it this morning. The pressure should be stabilizing as we speak." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then several people started talking at once. "You're telling me you let an unauthorized civilian onto this base?" Peterson said, his voice rising. "I'm telling you that a knowledgeable expert solved a problem that 6 different specialists couldn't fix." "That's beside the point. You violated security protocols." "I fixed the water system, sir. Children on this base are being exposed to lead contamination. That seemed more important than protocol." The room erupted in argument. Some people defended Sarah, others condemned her. The facilities manager stood up and made a phone call, then came back looking shocked. "Sir, maintenance just confirmed it. Water pressure has stabilized across the entire base. For the first time in 2 months, all readings are normal." Peterson looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. Anger, respect, confusion. "Colonel Mitchell, step outside, please." Sarah's heart sank, but she kept her composure as she left the room. She stood in the hallway, knowing her career was hanging by a thread. Amy slipped out and stood beside her. "Colonel, for what it's worth, you did the right thing." "The right thing doesn't always matter in the military," Sarah said quietly. They waited for 20 minutes. Finally, the door opened and Peterson called Sarah back in. "Colonel Mitchell, what you did this morning was reckless, insubordinate, and a clear violation of security regulations," he began. Sarah stood at attention. "Yes, sir." "It was also exactly what needed to be done." Sarah blinked. "Sir." Peterson's stern expression softened slightly. "I've spent the last 20 minutes on the phone with the security office and the Corps of Engineers. The security database error has been identified and fixed. Your clearance is now properly showing in the system. As for the water issue, preliminary tests confirm that the pressure stabilization has improved water quality markers across the board." He paused. "I don't like that you broke protocol, but I like even less that 6 highly paid experts missed a problem that a retired plumber spotted in minutes. That tells me we've gotten too dependent on technology and too dismissive of experience and practical knowledge." Sarah remained silent, unsure where this was going. "Your water treatment project is approved," Peterson continued. "Full funding, full authority. I want that system upgraded and operational within 6 months." Yes, sir, thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. You're also going to document what happened today, including the security breach, and submit it as a case study on the importance of thinking beyond standard procedures. And I want a full report on this Frank Holloway. If he's as good as you say, maybe we should be consulting him officially. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. I'll make sure he gets proper recognition, sir. Sarah left the administration building feeling like she'd just survived a battle. She'd won, but the victory felt fragile, temporary. She knew there would be consequences for what she'd done, even if the base commander had approved the project. She found Frank sitting on a bench near the visitors' center, reading a newspaper in the afternoon sun. He looked up as she approached. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Better than I expected, worse than I hoped," Sarah said, sitting down beside him. "The project is approved, but I have some explaining to do about bringing you onto the base." Frank folded his newspaper. "I'm sorry if I got you in trouble." "You didn't. I made the choice, and it was the right choice." She looked at him curiously. "Can I ask you something? Why were you so persistent about reporting that leak? Most people would have given up after being turned away once or twice." Frank was quiet for a moment, staring out at the base. "You see those buildings over there, the housing units?" Sarah nodded. "My grandson lives in one of those units with his wife and baby daughter. He's a sergeant deployed overseas right now. His wife, Emily, she mentioned a few months back that their water tasted funny. Then she noticed their daughter had a rash. The baby's pediatrician found elevated lead levels." Frank's voice grew quieter. "I did some research, found out this base has had water problems. Started investigating on my own, checking the systems from the outside. When I found that leak, I knew it was part of the problem. I couldn't just walk away. That's my great-granddaughter in there, drinking contaminated water." Sarah felt a surge of emotion. "Why didn't you tell me that before?" "Would it have mattered?" "Yes, of course it would." Frank smiled sadly. "People don't usually care about an old man's family troubles. They care about credentials, procedures, official channels. I learned that pretty quick." Sarah thought about all the times she'd been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated because of her age or gender. She thought about Corporal Jenkins treating her like a confused old woman. She thought about the security clerk who couldn't be bothered to help. She thought about the Corps of Engineers representative who doubted her findings. "I care," she said firmly, "and I'm going to make sure your great-granddaughter and every other child on this base has clean water. You have my word." Frank's eyes misted slightly. "Thank you." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into the water treatment project with renewed determination. The pressure stabilization that Frank's repair had provided allowed her team to run proper diagnostics for the first time in weeks. They identified multiple points in the system that needed upgrading or replacement. But Sarah also encountered resistance. The security office formally reprimanded her for the breach of protocol. She received a written warning that would go in her permanent file. Some of her colleagues began treating her differently, with either quiet admiration or poorly concealed disapproval. The Corps of Engineers representative, a man named Douglas Marsh, was particularly hostile. He'd built his reputation on his expertise, and having a retired civilian plumber find a problem his team missed had embarrassed him. "Colonel Mitchell, I've reviewed your report," he said during a project meeting. "I find several of your conclusions questionable." "Which one specifically?" Sarah asked. "Your assertion that the external leak was the primary cause of the pressure inconsistencies. My team's analysis suggests the problem is internal to the facility." "Then, why did the pressure stabilize immediately after we fixed the external leak?" Marsh's jaw tightened. "Coincidence, or a temporary fluctuation? I'm recommending we bring in an independent consulting firm to review the entire project." Sarah knew what that meant: delays, additional costs, and another group of experts who might or might not listen to her. but she also knew she couldn't appear defensive. "I welcome additional review," she said calmly. "The safety of the people on this base is what matters, not my ego." The independent consultants arrived 2 weeks later. They were a team of 3 engineers from a prestigious firm in Washington, D.C. Sarah presented all her findings, including Frank's contribution. The lead consultant, a woman named Dr. Rebecca Santos, listened carefully to everything Sarah said. Then she and her team spent 3 days examining every aspect of the water system. On the 4th day, Dr. Santos requested a meeting with Sarah privately. "Colonel Mitchell, I've completed my preliminary assessment," she said, sitting across from Sarah in her small office. Sarah braced herself for criticism or doubt. "Your analysis is sound," Dr. Santos continued. "In fact, it's excellent. The work you've done to identify and address the contamination sources is exactly what's needed. I'll be recommending that your project move forward without modification." Sarah felt relief wash over her. "Thank you. I do have one question, though. This Frank Holloway who identified the leak. You mentioned in your report that he's a retired plumber with no formal engineering degree." "That's correct. How did he spot something that multiple degreed engineers missed?" Sarah smiled. "Experience, instinct, a willingness to look at the problem from a practical rather than theoretical standpoint. And maybe most importantly, he had personal motivation. His great-granddaughter lives on this base." Dr. Santos nodded thoughtfully. "You know, we've seen this before. The best solutions often come from people who are closest to the problem, who have the most to lose if it isn't fixed. But those people are often dismissed because they don't have the right credentials or title." "Exactly. It's a problem in our field. We've become so focused on degrees and certifications that we sometimes forget the value of practical knowledge." Dr. Santos paused. "I'd like to meet Mr. Holloway if that's possible." "I can arrange that." 2 days later, Sarah brought Frank to a meeting with Dr. Santos and her team. She'd worried that they might be condescending or dismissive, but Dr. Santos treated Frank with genuine respect. "Mr. Holloway, can you walk us through how you identified the leak?" she asked. Frank explained his thought process, pointing out the visual cues he'd noticed, the patterns of water flow, the discoloration on the concrete. The consulting team listened intently, asking questions and taking notes. When Frank finished, Dr. Santos said, "Mr. Holloway, have you ever considered teaching? What you just described is a masterclass in diagnostic thinking." Frank looked surprised. "Teaching me?" "Yes, there are vocational programs, apprenticeship initiatives, even professional development courses for engineers. Your practical knowledge would be invaluable." Frank glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I suppose I could think about it," he said. After the meeting, as Sarah walked Frank to his car, he seemed thoughtful. "That was unexpected," he said. "Good unexpected or bad unexpected?" "Good, I think. I've been retired for 3 years now, and honestly, I've been bored. My wife passed 2 years ago, and my kids are all grown with their own lives. I've been feeling pretty useless lately." Sarah stopped walking. "Frank, you're not useless. You probably saved lives with what you did. You certainly saved the health of dozens of children on this base." "Maybe, but it's nice to feel like I have something to offer again. Like I'm not just an old man who people tolerate." Sarah understood that feeling all too well. "You have a lot to offer. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The water treatment project moved forward rapidly after that. With Dr. Santos's endorsement and the base commander's support, Sarah had the resources and authority she needed. Her team worked around the clock, replacing contaminated pipes, upgrading filtration systems, and installing new monitoring equipment. Frank became an unofficial consultant on the project. He visited the site regularly, offering insights and suggestions that consistently proved valuable. The younger engineers on Sarah's team initially viewed him with skepticism, but they quickly learned to respect his knowledge. One afternoon, Sarah overheard a conversation between Frank and one of her junior engineers, a recent graduate named Marcus. "I don't understand," Marcus was saying, looking at a blueprint. "According to the specs, this valve should be here, but Mr. Holloway says it should be 6 inches to the left." Another engineer, Linda, pulled up the computer model. "The model says the current position is optimal for water flow." Frank studied the blueprint and the model, then said, "Mind if I explain something?" Both young engineers nodded. "See, the computer model is based on ideal conditions. Perfect pipes, perfect pressure, perfect installation. But in the real world, nothing's perfect. That wall there," he pointed to a structural support. "It's slightly out of plumb. Not enough to be a building code violation, but enough to create turbulence if the valve is positioned where the model says. Move it 6 inches left and you account for that real-world imperfection." Marcus and Linda looked at each other, then back at Frank with newfound respect. "How did you know the wall was out of plumb?" Marcus asked. Frank smiled. "I looked at it. Sometimes the best diagnostic tool is your own eyes." Sarah watched this exchange with satisfaction. This was exactly what she'd hoped would happen, experienced knowledge being passed to the next generation. But not everyone was pleased with Frank's involvement. Douglas Marsh continued to object, claiming that having an uncredentialed civilian on a military project was inappropriate. He filed formal complaints, questioned every decision Frank influenced, and generally made himself a nuisance. Things came to a head during a progress review meeting. Marsh challenged one of Frank's recommendations about pipe material selection. "Mr. Holloway's suggestion to use copper instead of PVC in this section is unnecessarily expensive and not supported by current engineering standards," Marsh argued. Frank, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, spoke up. "With respect, sir, current standards don't account for the specific water chemistry on this base. The mineral content will degrade PVC over time. Copper will last 50 years longer." "That's speculation, not science," Marsh shot back. "It's experience. I've seen it happen on 3 different military bases." Marsh turned to Sarah. "Colonel Mitchell, I must object to having unqualified personnel making engineering decisions." Sarah had had enough. "Mr. Marsh, Frank Holloway has 47 years of hands-on experience with water systems. He identified a critical problem that your team missed. He's made recommendations that have been validated by Dr. Santos and her independent consultants. His qualifications may not include a degree, but his results speak for themselves." Results aren't enough in military contracting. There are regulations, standards, credential requirements. And those regulations and standards failed to protect the children on this base from lead poisoning, Sarah said, her voice sharp. "Frank Holloway succeeded where all our credentials and regulations failed. I think that's worth something." The room fell silent. Finally, the base commander, who'd been observing the exchange, spoke up. "Mr. Marsh, I appreciate your concern for proper procedures, but Colonel Mitchell makes a valid point. This project is about results, not just process. Mr. Holloway's recommendations stand unless you can provide concrete evidence that they're wrong." Marsh's face flushed red, but he said nothing more. After the meeting, Frank approached Sarah. "You didn't have to defend me like that," he said. "Yes, I did. Because you were right and he was wrong. And because I'm tired of watching good people get dismissed because they don't fit someone's narrow definition of qualified." Frank studied her face. "This isn't just about me, is it?" Sarah sighed. "No, it's about every time I've been underestimated because of my age or my gender. It's about every person who's been told they're not good enough because they don't have the right credentials or the right connections. It's about changing a system that values paperwork over people." That's a big fight to take on. 3 months later, The water treatment facility upgrade was nearly complete. Test results showed dramatic improvements in water quality. Lead levels had dropped to well below safety thresholds. Other contaminants had been eliminated. The pressure system was stable and efficient. Sarah stood in the facility's control room, watching the monitors display perfect readings across the board. Her team had done exceptional work, and she was proud of every one of them. "Colonel Mitchell," Amy approached with a folder. "You have a visitor, says it's important." Sarah turned to see Corporal Jenkins, the young gate guard who turned her away months ago. He looked nervous. "Ma'am, I wanted to apologize," he said, "for how I treated you that day. I was just following what the computer said, but I should have tried harder to help you." Sarah studied the young man. She could see genuine remorse in his face. "Corporal, you were doing your job," she said. "The problem wasn't you. It was a system that valued data over judgment. I don't hold it against you." Jenkins looked relieved. "Thank you, ma'am. I also wanted you to know that we've changed some of our procedures at the gate. We're now trained to escalate issues more quickly and to look beyond what the computer tells us." "That's good to hear." After Jenkins left, Frank arrived for his daily visit to check on the project's progress. He'd become a familiar presence on the base, and the guards now waved him through without question. "How are we looking?" he asked, scanning the control panel. "Perfect. We're ready for final inspection next week." Frank smiled. "Your team did outstanding work." "Our team," Sarah corrected. "You were as much a part of this as anyone." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, then Frank said, "I got a call yesterday from Dr. Santos." "Oh." "She's connected to a vocational training program in Richmond. They want me to develop a curriculum for teaching practical plumbing and water system maintenance. Combination of classroom instruction and hands-on training." "Frank, that's wonderful." I said yes. Figured it's time to stop being retired and start being useful again. Sarah felt a surge of happiness for him. "You were always useful, but I'm glad you're getting the recognition you deserve." "Speaking of recognition, I heard through the grapevine that you're getting a commendation for this project." Sarah shrugged. "It's just a piece of paper." "No, it's not. It's acknowledgement that you did something important, something that mattered. Don't dismiss that." Sarah thought about all the times she'd been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated, about how hard she'd had to fight for every scrap of respect and recognition, about how satisfying it felt to prove the doubters wrong. "You're right," she said, "it does matter." The final inspection took place on a cold December morning. The base commander was there, along with representatives from the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Health, and various other agencies. Dr. Santos and her consulting team had returned to verify the results. Douglas Marsh was notably absent. The inspection took 4 hours. Every system was tested, every reading verified, every procedure reviewed. At the end, Dr. Santos stood before the assembled group. "This water treatment facility now exceeds all federal and military standards for safety and efficiency," she announced. "The work done here represents engineering excellence combined with practical wisdom. It should serve as a model for similar projects across the military." There was applause. Sarah felt Amy squeeze her shoulder in congratulation. But Dr. Santos wasn't finished. "I want to specifically recognize 2 individuals whose contributions were essential to this project's success. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, whose determination and leadership drove this project forward despite significant obstacles, and Frank Holloway, whose practical expertise and personal commitment identified critical problems that others missed." More applause. Frank, standing in the back of the room, looked uncomfortable with the attention but pleased. The base commander took the floor. "What happened here is bigger than just fixing a water system. It's about remembering that experience matters, that practical knowledge has value, and that we shouldn't dismiss people just because they don't fit our preconceived notions of expertise. He looked directly at Sarah. Colonel Mitchell, you took a risk. You violated protocol because you believed it was the right thing to do. That kind of moral courage is rare and valuable. This base, and especially the families living here, owe you a debt of gratitude. After the formal ceremony ended, there was an informal reception. Sarah found herself surrounded by people offering congratulations, but she kept looking for Frank. She finally spotted him talking to a young couple with a baby. As Sarah approached, she recognized the woman as Frank's granddaughter-in-law, Emily. The baby in her arms was happy and healthy, with bright eyes and rosy cheeks. "Colonel Mitchell," Emily said, tears in her eyes, "I wanted to thank you. Our daughter's last blood test came back perfect. No more leads, she's healthy." Sarah felt her own eyes water. That's what this was all about, making sure children like her are safe. Emily turned to Frank. "And Grandpa, you were right. You told me months ago that you'd fix it, and you did." Frank hugged his granddaughter-in-law and kissed the baby's forehead. Couldn't have done it without Colonel Mitchell. She was willing to listen when nobody else would. The baby reached out and grabbed Sarah's finger, squeezing it with surprising strength. Sarah laughed, feeling a joy she hadn't experienced in years. This was what mattered, not the commendations or the recognition, but this baby's healthy grip, this family's relief, this tangible proof that fighting for what's right produces real results. A few weeks later, Sarah received an unexpected visitor to her office. It was Douglas Marsh. "Colonel Mitchell, do you have a moment?" he asked, looking uncomfortable. "Of course, come in." Marsh sat down, clearly struggling with what to say. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about Frank Holloway. I was wrong about your approach to this project. I let my ego get in the way of recognizing good work." Sarah waited, letting him continue. "I've been doing some thinking since the final inspection about why I was so resistant to Mr. Holloway's involvement. I think it's because he made me feel inadequate. Here was someone with no formal training doing what I'd spent years studying to do and doing it better. That threatened me." "I understand that feeling," Sarah said quietly. "I've spent my whole career having to prove myself to people who assumed I wasn't capable." "I'm sorry I was one of those people." Marsh paused. "I've recommended to my superiors that we develop a program to incorporate practical experts like Mr. Holloway into our consulting process. We can't let our reliance on credentials blind us to valuable knowledge." Sarah felt a sense of vindication. "That's a good idea. I also wanted you to know that I've withdrawn my complaints about your security breach. What you did was necessary, and I should have supported you instead of undermining you." After Marsh left, Sarah sat alone in her office, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about how close she'd come to giving up that day at the gate, how easy it would have been to just accept the security denial and reschedule the meeting. But she hadn't given up, and neither had Frank. Two people who'd been dismissed and underestimated had come together and accomplished something important. They'd proven that age doesn't equal incompetence, that experience has value, and that sometimes the best solutions come from unlikely sources. 6 months later, Sarah attended the graduation ceremony for the first class of Frank's vocational training program. 20 students received certificates in advanced plumbing and water systems maintenance. Frank stood at the podium, looking proud and energized. "These students represent the future of our trade," he told the audience. "They've learned not just from textbooks and manuals, but from hands-on experience and practical problem solving. They understand that the best tool you have is the one between your ears, your ability to think, observe, and adapt." After the ceremony, one of Frank's students approached Sarah. "Colonel Mitchell, I wanted to thank you. Mr. Holloway tells the story about the Fort Harrison water project in class, about how you were willing to trust his expertise even though he didn't have formal credentials. That story inspired me to enroll in this program. I'd been told I wasn't smart enough for engineering school, but Mr. Holloway showed me there are different kinds of smart. Sarah smiled. There are indeed. Don't let anyone tell you what you're capable of. Only you can determine that. As she drove home that evening, Sarah reflected on the unexpected turn her life had taken. The water treatment project had been completed successfully and was now being used as a case study in military engineering courses. Frank's training program was expanding to other cities, and Sarah herself had been promoted and given broader authority over infrastructure projects across multiple bases. But more than any of that, she felt a sense of peace. She'd fought for what was right, even when it was difficult and risky. She'd stood up for someone who'd been dismissed and overlooked. She'd proven that courage and conviction matter more than credentials and protocol. Her phone rang. It was Frank. "Sarah, I hope I'm not bothering you." "Never, what's up?" "I just got a call from the Department of Defense. They want to create a nationwide program based on what we did at Fort Harrison, combining experienced tradespeople with formally trained engineers to improve infrastructure projects on military bases. They want both of us to help develop it." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. "That's amazing, Frank. I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in me when nobody else would." "We believed in each other," Sarah corrected, "and we proved that experience and courage still matter. So what do you say? Ready for another adventure?" Sarah thought about Corporal Jenkins dismissing her at the gate all those months ago, about the security clerk who couldn't be bothered to help, about Douglas Marsh's skepticism and the Corps of Engineers' misdiagnosis, about all the times she'd been underestimated and overlooked. And then she thought about Frank spotting that leak in 2 minutes, about the pressure stabilizing, about Emily's baby with healthy blood levels, about 20 vocational students graduating with new skills and confidence, about a system slowly changing for the better. "Absolutely," Sarah said. "Let's do it." 6 months later, the program was official. The Department of Defense announced the Veterans and Tradespeople Technical Advisory Program, designed to bring practical expertise into military infrastructure projects. Frank was named the program's first director of practical knowledge. Sarah was appointed as the senior engineering liaison. Together, they traveled to bases across the country, teaching engineers to value experience alongside credentials, showing young soldiers that there are many paths to expertise, and proving that the best solutions often come from unexpected sources. At one base in Texas, Sarah stood before a group of young engineers and told them the story of how it all started, about being turned away at a gate, about a retired plumber who nobody would listen to, about taking a risk because it was the right thing to do. "The lesson here isn't that credentials don't matter," she concluded. "Education and training are important, but they're not the only things that matter. Experience, judgment, courage, and a willingness to look beyond the obvious, these things matter too. Don't ever dismiss someone just because they don't have the right paperwork. And don't ever let anyone dismiss you just because you don't fit their narrow definition of qualified." One of the young engineers raised his hand. "Ma'am, what would you have done if the base commander had ended your career over the security breach?" Sarah thought about it. "I would have been okay with that, because some things are worth the risk. Those children's health was worth my career. Frank's expertise was worth fighting for. Doing the right thing mattered more than protecting myself." Another hand went up. "Do you have any regrets?" Sarah smiled. "Only one. I regret that I almost didn't take the risk. I almost just accepted being turned away. I almost let the system defeat me. But I'm glad I didn't. Because if I had, those children would still be drinking contaminated water, Frank would still be dismissed as just an old plumber, and we wouldn't have this program that's helping people across the country." After the presentation, a young female lieutenant approached Sarah privately. "Colonel Mitchell, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." How did you keep going? How did you keep fighting when everyone was against you? Sarah looked at the young woman and saw herself 30 years ago. Young, determined, facing a system that didn't always value what she had to offer. I kept going because I had to, Sarah said. Because if I didn't fight for what was right, who would? Because every time someone told me I couldn't do something, I became more determined to prove them wrong. And because I learned that the people who doubt you don't determine your worth. You determine your worth by what you do, by the choices you make, by the courage you show. The lieutenant's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, I needed to hear that. Sarah put a hand on her shoulder. You're going to face challenges. You're going to be underestimated and overlooked. But don't let that stop you. Your perspective, your skills, your determination, they all matter. Never forget that. That evening, Sarah and Frank sat in a small diner near the base, eating pie and drinking coffee. Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this? Frank asked. Never. When I was standing outside that gate, feeling humiliated and defeated, I couldn't have imagined any of this. What changed? Sarah thought about it. I stopped accepting other people's limitations. I stopped letting the system tell me what was possible. I started trusting my own judgment. Frank nodded. Same here. I spent weeks being told to go away, that I didn't matter, that nobody cared what an old plumber thought. I could have given up. But I kept thinking about my great-granddaughter, about all the other children on that base. I couldn't just walk away. I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you listened. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Frank said, You know what the best part of all this is? What? It's not the recognition or the program or any of that. It's knowing that we made a real difference. That baby, Emily's daughter, she's healthy because of what we did. Those students in my training program, they have hope and skills because we fought for this. That young lieutenant you talked to today, she's going to keep pushing forward because you showed her it's possible. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. You're right, that is the best part. Frank raised his coffee cup. To making a difference. Sarah clinked her cup against his. To fighting for what's right, no matter the cost. And to proving that age and experience still matter. They always have, Sarah said. Some people just needed to be reminded. As they finished their pie and prepared to leave, Sarah's phone buzzed with an email. It was from the Army Corps of Engineers. They were requesting her expertise on a water contamination issue at a base in California. They specifically asked if Frank Holloway might be available to consult. Sarah showed Frank the email. He grinned. Looks like we're not done yet. I hope we never are, Sarah said. They walked out of the diner into the cool evening air. Sarah looked up at the stars, thinking about everything that had happened, everything that had changed. She thought about the girl she'd been, joining the military decades ago with dreams of making a difference. About the woman she'd become, fighting battles both literal and figurative. About the children who were safer because she'd refused to give up. And she thought about Frank, an ordinary man who'd done something extraordinary simply because it was right. Who'd been dismissed and ignored but persisted anyway. Who'd proven that wisdom doesn't always come with credentials. Together, they'd shown that age doesn't diminish capability. That experience has immeasurable value. That courage and conviction can overcome bureaucracy and doubt. That two people who refuse to accept defeat can change an entire system. Ready for the next challenge? Frank asked. Sarah smiled, always. They got in their cars and drove off into the night, ready for whatever came next. Two people who'd been underestimated, dismissed, and rejected. Two people who'd proven everyone wrong. Two people who'd shown that the most powerful force in the world isn't credentials or authority or protocol.